Subscribe to Story Lab. Now, let's begin this one. The estate spread across 40 acres of Virginia countryside, all manicured lawns and imported roses that probably cost more than most people's cars. John Mueller knelt in the dirt, pruning a hedge near the main house's east wing, his hands steady despite the heat. Nobody looked twice at gardeners. That was the point. 6 years ago, he'd been leading operations in places that didn't exist on maps. CIA Special Activities Division. The part of the agency that handled what couldn't be acknowledged. He'd been good at it, too good, maybe. Then, Kabul happened. A Taliban commander who turned out to be a CIA asset. Bad intelligence that wasn't so bad after all, and 8 civilians dead in a market because John had pulled the trigger based on a lie someone higher up had sold. The agency buried it. John couldn't. He'd resigned, disappeared into civilian life, and eventually landed here working for Theodore Donnelly. Tech billionaire, defense contractor, the kind of man whose handshake moved markets. Donnelly had hired him through a landscaping company. Never knowing his head gardener could field strip an assault rifle blindfolded or speak 4 languages. That was 3 years ago. John was 38 now, content to let his old life stay buried. The Donnelly estate was quiet, safe. The kind of place where the worst emergency was a late frost killing the tulips. Mr. Mueller? John looked up. Doug Wynn, head of estate security, stood on the terrace. Former Secret Service, competent but by the book. He looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Donnelly wants the fountain area ready for Thursday's charity event. Can you handle that? Already on it, John said, pulling off his gloves. Virginia Donnelly appeared behind Doug, elegant in a cream pantsuit, phone pressed to her ear. She smiled at John, she always did. Good employer, treated the staff well. She ended her call and descended the terrace steps. John, the boys keep asking if you'll show them the new koi, she said. They're obsessed since you installed the pond. The twins, Benjamin and Milton, 7 years old, mirror images with their mother's dark hair and their father's sharp eyes. They'd taken to following John around the grounds, asking endless questions about plants and bugs, and whether he knew any cool soldier stuff because they'd overheard Doug mention John had been in the military. John had kept that vague. Just Army, he'd said. Nothing special. I'll stop by the house after lunch, John promised. Virginia's smile widened, then faded as her phone rang again. She glanced at the screen and sighed. Work never stops. Theodore's in back-to-back meetings until tonight. Defense Department contracts. She waved and headed back inside, phone already to her ear. John returned to his hedge. Peaceful, safe, boring. He preferred boring. The call came at 2:47 p.m. John was near the western fence line when he heard the screaming. Not scared at a spider's screaming. Real terror, primal and raw. He dropped his shears and ran toward the main house, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there anymore. Virginia Donnelly stood in the driveway. Her phone shattered at her feet. Doug Wynn had her by the shoulders, trying to calm her. Theodore's Bentley skidded to a halt. He must have been on his way back from meetings, and the billionaire practically fell out, his face ashen. What happened? Theodore demanded. The school called. Virginia gasped. Someone took them. Someone took our boys. John's blood went cold. He approached slowly, listening. What do you mean took them? Theodore's voice climbed an octave. Doug spoke, his training kicking in. 2 men, witnesses say, posed as family, friends picking them up early. The school's secretary let them go. They're reviewing security footage now. The FBI, Theodore started. Already notified, Doug said. They're sending agents. John stayed back, watching. Theodore paced like a caged animal. Virginia wept. Doug made calls, coordinating with local police. John studied the scene, his old instincts kicking in despite himself. The timing was too clean. The school had called 30 minutes ago. The kidnappers would be switching vehicles by now, maybe already across state lines. This was professional. 2 FBI agents arrived 90 minutes later. Special Agents Nicholas Carson and Lydia Norman. Carson was mid-40s, slick suit, slicker smile. Norman was younger, sharp-eyed, skeptical. They set up in Theodore's study, asked the standard questions, offered the standard reassurances. John watched from the doorway as they worked. Carson seemed too relaxed, too confident. Norman did the actual investigating, while Carson mostly talked about procedure and protocols. Then Theodore's private line rang. The one only family and close associates had. Everyone froze. Carson nodded. "Answer it." "Will Trace." Theodore picked up, hands shaking. "Hello." A electronically distorted voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "Theodore Donnelly. Your sons are alive. For now." Virginia's sob cut through the silence. "What do you want?" Theodore's voice cracked. $20 million. "But here's what makes this interesting. We're not just selling them back to you. We're auctioning them. Highest bidder gets both boys. You're currently competing with 147 interested buyers from 6 continents. The auction goes live in 6 hours. Wire instructions will follow." "Use sick," Theodore started. 6 hours, Mr. Donnelly. After that, your sons disappear into a very dark world. We suggest you start liquidating assets." The line went dead. The study erupted. Virginia collapsed into a chair. Theodore shouted demands that no one could answer. Agent Norman tried to calm everyone while Carson stepped into the hallway, phone to his ear. John followed him. Carson noticed, gave him a dismissive glance. "You're the gardener?" "Landscaper," John corrected. "You're not running a trace." Carson's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" The call lasted 42 seconds. "You had equipment set up, but you didn't signal your partner. Didn't call it in. No trace." "Listen, friend, this is federal business." "I was military intelligence," John lied smoothly. "I know what a trace looks like. You didn't run one." Carson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Back off. We know what we're doing." John held his gaze. Carson blinked first, returning to the study. John stayed in the hallway, mind racing. Either the FBI was incompetent or Carson was dirty. Given the sophistication of the kidnapping, John bet on the latter. He walked outside, pulling out his phone. Ron Edwards answered on the second ring. "It's been 3 years, John," Ron said. "Thought you'd gone full civilian. I need a favor." "Off book." Ron had been John's handler at the CIA, one of the few people who'd backed his decision to leave. "What kind of favor?" "Information on a kidnapping. 2 7-year-old boys, taken today from a private school in McLean, Virginia. Trafficking ring with an auction setup. Professional operation." Silence. Then, "Jesus, you involved?" "I work for the father." "And the FBI?" "That's what I'm worried about." More silence. "I'll make calls. Give me 20 minutes. John hung up and walked the grounds, thinking. 6 hours. The kidnappers needed a secure location to hold the boys and run an online auction. Somewhere isolated, but with high-speed internet and security. Somewhere they felt safe. That meant local. They hadn't had time to move the boys far. This was planned, which meant surveillance, reconnaissance. Someone had watched the estate, learned the routine, knew exactly when to strike. John circled back to the driveway. Virginia's Range Rover sat where she'd left it. The school was 12 minutes away. The same route every day. Same time. Predictable. He studied the tree line beyond the fence. If he were running surveillance, that's where he'd set up. Northern Ridge. Clear sight line to the house and driveway. His phone buzzed. "Ron? Your boys are in deep trouble," Ron said without preamble. "The auction setup? It's legit. Dark web forum. Encrypted. Invitation only. These people run a network. We've been tracking them for 18 months but can't pin down leadership. Names. Goes by the broker. Maybe one person, maybe a collective. They specialize in high-value targets, diplomatic kids, wealthy families, anyone whose disappearance generates headlines and buyers. Your billionaire's sons fit the profile perfectly. The FBI agent on scene, Nicholas Carson. What do you know about him?" Keyboard clicks. Clean record. Been with the Bureau 12 years. White-collar crimes division mostly. Recently transferred to Crimes Against Children unit. A pause. "That's actually weird." "Why?" "Because that kind of transfer usually takes months of paperwork and training. His went through in 3 weeks. Someone expedited it." John's suspicions crystallized. He's the inside man. Can't prove it. But if he is, those boys are already gone. These people don't take chances. They'll move them, hide them, and by the time the auction ends, tracking them down will be impossible. John checked his watch. 5 hours, 18 minutes. "I need locations. Known associates, safe houses, anything." John, this isn't Afghanistan. You can't just... I'm not asking for permission. Ron sighed. I'll send you what we have. But John? These people are vicious. They've killed witnesses, eliminated competition. If you're doing what I think you're doing, thanks, Ron. John hung up and headed back inside. The study was chaos. Theodore was on 3 phones at once, calling banks, lawyers, anyone who could help liquidate 20 million in hours. Virginia sat statue still, her eyes empty. Agent Norman worked her laptop. Carson was gone. John found him outside, smoking by his bureau sedan. You don't smoke, John said, approaching. Carson turned, irritated. How would you know? No smell on you earlier. No nicotine stains on your fingers. You came out here to make a call you didn't want overheard. Carson dropped the unlit cigarette. You're starting to piss me off, Gardner. Good. John moved closer. Because here's what I think. I think you knew this was going to happen. I think you're coordinating with the kidnappers. And I think you're here to make sure Theodore pays instead of trying to find his sons. Carson's hand drifted toward his hip. That's a serious accusation. Prove me wrong. Run the trace on the next call. Actually investigate instead of running interference. Last warning. Back off. John smiled, cold and dangerous. Or what? You'll arrest me? Go ahead. Let's see how that plays when I tell your partner what I know. They stared at each other. Carson broke first, getting into his car and driving away. John watched him go, then returned inside. He found Theodore in the study, surrounded by financial advisors. Sir, I need to speak with you. Privately. Theodore looked up, desperate. Not now, John. I'm trying to... I can get your sons back. The room went silent. Virginia stood. Agent Norman looked up from her laptop. Theodore stared. What did you say? John closed the door. I wasn't Army Intelligence, Mr. Donnelly. I was CIA Special Activities Division. I've run operations in 14 countries. I've tracked people who didn't want to be found. I can find Benjamin and Milton. The FBI. Agent Carson is compromised. He's working with the kidnappers. Virginia gasped. Norman stood up. That's a serious allegation, which you can investigate after the boys are home, John said. Mr. Donnelly, I can do this, but I need resources, and I need you to trust me. Theodore looked at his wife, then back at John. What do you need? Money for equipment, access to your security systems archives, and everyone stays out of my way. If you're lying, then you lose nothing you weren't going to lose anyway, John said. But if I'm right, your sons are home in 4 hours. Theodore made his decision. Do it. Whatever you need. John turned to Norman. Agent, you seem like you actually want to solve this. Help me, or don't. But if you're going to help, understand we're not going by the book. Norman hesitated, then nodded. Those boys are what matter. What do you need? Keep Carson away from here. Stall him, misdirect him. I don't care how. Just give me room to work. As Norman left to run interference, John pulled up the security archives on Theodore's computer. He scrolled back 2 weeks, watching the feeds. They're a white van, parked on the access road overlooking the estate. Same van, 3 different days. Always between 2 to 3 p.m., right when the boys would be coming home from school. He zoomed in on the license plate. Rental vehicle, reported stolen 4 days ago. Classic misdirection. But the driver had been sloppy. In one frame, he'd gotten out to adjust a camera. His face was partially visible. John ran the image through facial recognition software, CIA tools he'd technically lost access to, but Ron had sent him a backdoor login. The system churned for 90 seconds, then produced a hit. Mickey Kaufman. Petty criminal. Mostly B and E and stolen vehicles. Last known address in Baltimore. But more interesting was his known associates list. Gregory Webb. John pulled Webb's file. 43. Multiple arrests for solicitation and pandering. 2 convictions. Served 3 years total. Since his last release 7 years ago, he'd gone dark. No arrests, no known employment, but financial records showed him living well beyond his means. Ron's intel dump arrived, and John cross-referenced. Webb appeared in their trafficking investigation. Not the leader, he was mid-level at best, but he ran procurement. He found the targets, planned the grabs, delivered the merchandise. And according to surveillance logs from 6 months ago, Webb frequented a property in rural Maryland. An old farm, 50 acres, converted into what looked like a legitimate event venue but rarely had events. Perfect cover. John checked the time. 4 hours, 41 minutes. He stood up, pulling Theodore aside. I know where they are. I'm leaving now. I'm coming with you. Theodore said. No. You stay here. Act like you're raising the money. If they suspect you're not playing along, they'll move the boys or worse. John, Mr. Donnelly, I've done this before. Trust me. Theodore looked at his wife, then back at John. Bring them home. John grabbed his truck keys and headed for the garage. He had a storage unit 30 miles away, one he'd kept from his CIA days, despite telling himself he'd never need it again. Inside was everything he'd thought he'd left behind. Time to see if he still remembered how to be John Mueller, operative. The storage unit smelled like gun oil and regret. John flipped on the lights, revealing the carefully organized remnants of his old life. Weapons locker, tactical gear, communications equipment, and a go bag that was always ready. He worked quickly. Glock 19, suppressor, 2 spare magazines, combat knife, tactical vest, plate carrier, night vision monocular, flex cuffs, medical kit, everything he'd need for a one-man extraction in hostile territory. His hands moved on autopilot, muscle memory from 1,000 operations taking over. Check the weapons, test the equipment, plan the approach. He'd done this in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. Now he was doing it in Maryland for 2 7-year-old boys who liked feeding koi fish. He changed into dark clothing, strapped on the vest, and loaded everything into his truck. The drive to Webb's property would take 90 minutes. That left him 3 hours to plan and execute. Not a lot of time, but he'd worked with less. His phone buzzed. Ron again. I have thermal satellite imagery of the property, Ron said. Pulling strings I shouldn't pull, but those are kids. 8 heat signatures in the main building. 2 small, probably your boys, 6 adults. Locations? Most are clustered on the 2nd floor. Looks like they've set up in what used to be the master bedroom, probably running the auction from there. The 2 small signatures are ground floor, northeast corner, isolated room. John processed the information, already visualizing the layout. Security? Cameras on all entrances. Motion sensors on the perimeter. But John, this isn't CIA. You have no backup, no extraction team. No. I know what I don't have. Then you also know this is suicide. It would be if I was planning to be subtle, John said. I'm not. He hung up and drove north, mind racing through scenarios. 6 hostiles, probably armed. In a defensive position with hostages, standard assault tactics wouldn't work. Too much risk to the boys. He needed to draw the kidnappers out, split their focus, create chaos. Make them react instead of act. His phone buzzed with a message from Agent Norman. Carson is back. Asking questions about you. How long do I stall? John replied. 2 hours. After that, doesn't matter. The farm appeared at dusk, exactly as Ron had described. Main house, 2 outbuildings, surrounded by empty fields. The driveway was gated, camera mounted on the post. Motion sensors probably buried along the fence line. John parked a mile down the road and hiked through the woods, approaching from the east where the tree line came closest to the house. He moved silently, using terrain and shadow, skills he'd honed over 2 decades. He reached the perimeter and stopped, watching. Lights were on in the 2nd floor windows. He could see shadows moving. The ground floor was dark except for one room northeast corner, just like Ron had said. His earpiece crackled. John, I'm monitoring their communications. The auction just went live. Bidding starts at 10 million. John checked his watch. 2 hours. 15 minutes left. He pulled out his phone and dialed Theodore. Are they watching your accounts? Yes, Theodore said. They sent instructions. They're tracking everything. Wire 5 million to the account they provided. Make it look like you're having trouble raising the rest. What? They said 20. Do it. And Theodore, turn on every light in your house. Make it obvious you're home, that the FBI is there. Keep them thinking they're in control. He hung up and moved closer to the house. From this angle, he could see through the ground floor window. A single door, heavy duty, probably locked from the outside. And through the window, sitting on the floor, tied back to back. Benjamin and Milton. They looked terrified, but unharmed. John felt something cold settle in his chest. These people had made a fatal mistake. They'd taken children, his employer's children, kids who'd showed him their drawings and asked him about bugs and laughed when he made the koi fish jump for food. He'd left the CIA to stop killing, but that didn't mean he'd forgotten how. John circled to the back of the house. The cameras covered the doors and windows, but not the ventilation duct for the old oil furnace. He'd seen the external access panel from the satellite images. It was 30 inches square tight, but manageable. He approached silently, tested the panel. Unlocked. Careless. He opened it and squeezed inside, moving through the ductwork like a ghost. The metal barely creaked. He emerged in the basement, a musty room filled with old furniture and storage boxes. Upstairs, he heard voices. Laughter. These people felt safe. They shouldn't. John moved to the stairs, ascending silently. The ground floor was a long hallway with rooms on either side. The boys' prison was at the far end. Between him and them were at least 2 hostels. Maybe more. He checked his Glock. Full magazine, round-chambered, suppressor tight. Then his earpiece crackled. John. Bidding just hit 15 million. Theodore's payment is showing as pending. They're getting suspicious. John keyed his mic twice acknowledgement and moved forward. The first hostel was in the kitchen, back turned, making coffee. John crossed the distance in 3 silent strides and put him in a chokehold, cutting off blood to the brain. The man went limp in 7 seconds. John lowered him quietly, flex-cuffed his wrists and ankles, and stuffed a gag in his mouth. 1 down. 5 to go. A voice called from upstairs. Mickey. Bring coffee when it's ready. Mickey, the man from the surveillance footage. He was unconscious on the kitchen floor. John grabbed the coffee pot and headed up the stairs, keeping his head down, hoping the dim lighting would disguise him long enough. The auction room was exactly where Ron had predicted. 6 people crowded around laptops, watching bids climb. Gregory Webb stood at the center, a thin man with dead eyes and a satisfied smile. 17 million, Webb said. Gentlemen, we are printing money tonight. John set the coffee pot down hard on the table, making them all look up. In the split second of confusion, he drew his weapon. Hands up. Now. Webb's smile vanished. A woman to his left reached for a gun, and John shot her in the shoulder. The suppressed report was loud enough to freeze everyone else. Next person who moves dies, John said calmly. On your knees. Hands behind your heads. They complied, terrified. John moved around the room, kicking away weapons, flex-cuffing everyone. Webb glared at him. You have no idea what you just did. We have buyers. I know exactly what I did, John said. Where are the other 2? Webb's expression flickered. John smiled. Downstairs guarding the boys. Probably heard the gunshot and are coming up. Here's what happens next. You're going to call them. Tell them to check on Mickey in the kitchen. They walk in, I take them. Or you don't, and I shoot everyone in this room starting with you. Webb swallowed hard and nodded. John handed him a phone, keeping the gun pressed to his temple. Webb called. Check on Mickey. Thought I heard something. Footsteps on the stairs. 2 men appeared, weapons drawn. John shot both in the legs before they could react. They went down screaming. 8 hostiles. 8 down. 3 minutes. John zip-tied the newcomers, then stood. Your auction's over. Your network is over. You're all going to federal prison where you'll spend the rest of your lives being exactly what you turned those children into merchandise. He pulled out his phone and called Agent Norman. Property secured. Send backup and ambulances. Multiple gunshot wounds. Non-fatal. John. Carson is on his way there. Perfect. Tell him to bring FBI forensics. They'll want to document the servers. This whole operation is on those laptops. He hung up and went downstairs. The boy's door was still locked. He kicked it in. Benjamin and Milton looked up, terror turning to recognition. Mr. Mueller? John holstered his weapon and knelt down, cutting their bonds. Hey guys, your dad sent me to bring you home. They crashed into him, sobbing. John held them, feeling something crack inside his carefully maintained walls. Are the bad men gone? Milton whispered. Yeah, they're gone. You're safe now. John carried both boys outside, one in each arm. They buried their faces in his shoulders as red and blue lights appeared down the driveway. Agent Norman's vehicle led the convoy, followed by Maryland State Police and ambulances. Norman approached, weapon drawn, then holstered it when she saw John with the boys. Are they? They're fine. Everyone inside is neutralized. The one with the shoulder wound needs urgent care. The others can wait. Carson's sedan skidded to a halt. He jumped out, face twisted in fury. You assaulted federal suspects. You contaminated my crime scene. Your crime scene? Norman turned on him. You weren't even here. And how did you know about this location? We never called it in. Carson froze, realizing his mistake. John smiled. Because he's been working with them, John said. Check his financials. Check his communications. You'll find everything you need. Norman nodded to two state troopers. Detain Agent Carson. Now. As Carson was being cuffed and read his rights, screaming about false accusations and wrongful arrest, John walked the boys to an ambulance. EMTs checked them over while John stepped back, letting Theodore and Virginia through. The reunion was messy, tearful, and beautiful. Theodore looked at John over his son's heads, mouthing two words, "Thank you." John nodded and turned away. His job was done. But as he walked back to his truck, Ron's voice came through his earpiece. John, we're running forensics on those laptops. The auction network is bigger than we thought. Clients in 30 countries. And there's something else. What? Webb wasn't the broker, he reported to someone. Someone's still out there. John stopped walking. Who? They used a code name on the servers. The Shepherd. And John, there's a message. It popped up 5 minutes ago, after you shut down the auction. It says, tell the gardener he just made a very powerful enemy. We'll speak again soon. John looked back at the farmhouse, at the boys safe in their parents' arms, at the kidnappers being loaded into police vehicles. He'd won this round. But apparently, the war wasn't over. Let them come, John said quietly. I'm not hiding anymore. 3 days passed before John returned to work. Theodore had insisted he take time off, offered him a bonus that would have paid for a year's living expenses. John had accepted the time off, declined the money. He hadn't done it for payment. The estate felt different now, quieter, but the silence had weight. The FBI had swarmed the place for 48 hours, documenting everything, interviewing everyone. Agent Norman had led the investigation, and she'd been thorough. Carson was in custody, his house and finances being torn apart by federal auditors. They'd found everything: encrypted communications, offshore accounts, evidence of 7 previous kidnappings he'd helped facilitate. But the Shepherd remained a ghost. John was kneeling in the rose garden when Benjamin and Milton found him. They'd been different since the rescue, quieter, prone to nightmares according to Virginia. But they still sought John out, still followed him around the grounds. Mr. Mueller? Benjamin said quietly. Can we ask you something? John set down his pruning shears. Sure. Were you really in the army? Milton asked. Because those men had guns and you weren't scared. John considered his answer carefully. I was scared, but I was more scared of what would happen to you if I didn't act. Mom says you saved our lives. Your parents would have paid the money. You would have been fine. Benjamin shook his head. We heard them talking. The bad men. They said even if Dad paid, they couldn't let us go because we saw their faces. They were going to. The boy's voice broke. John pulled both boys close. You're safe now. That's what matters. They stayed like that for a while, then Virginia called them for lunch. As they ran off, John noticed Theodore watching from the terrace. The billionaire approached, sitting on the stone bench beside the roses. Thank you, Theodore said. I know I already said it, but I'll keep saying it. You gave me my sons back. Just doing what needed to be done. The FBI says this network is huge, international. They're dismantling it, but it'll take years. Theodore paused. Agent Norman also said you turned down witness protection. They're worried about retaliation. I can handle myself. I know you can. I've seen the reports. They declassified enough to confirm what you told me. John Mueller, CIA Special Activities Division, decorated operative with a record of successful missions on 5 continents. Theodore leaned forward. You left the agency, built a new life, and I've dragged you back into that world. That's on the kidnappers, not you. Either way, I'm not comfortable with you being exposed. So, I have a proposition. Theodore pulled out a folder. I'm creating a new division of Donnelly Industries. Private security consulting. Legitimate, legal, but for situations where traditional security isn't enough. I want you to run it. John took the folder, but didn't open it. I'm a gardener. You're a soldier pretending to be a gardener because you wanted peace. But peace isn't the same as hiding. Work for me, officially. Help people who need the kind of help only someone with your skills can provide. I left that life because I was tired of killing. Then don't kill. Extract. Rescue. Protect. Use those skills to save people instead of. Theodore caught himself. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to make you leave. John was quiet for a long moment. Kabul. 3 years ago, bad intelligence led to 8 civilians dead, including 2 kids. I pulled the trigger because I believed what I was told. Later learned the intel was fabricated by someone climbing the ladder, willing to sacrifice an entire family to take out one target that turned out to be our own asset. Jesus. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't trust that the people giving me orders actually cared about the mission or the casualties. So I walked away. John looked at the folder. What makes you different? Because I'm asking you to save people, not kill them. Because you'll choose the missions, set the rules, make the calls. And because those are my sons you rescued. I know what kind of man you are. John opened the folder. Contracts, legal documents, salary information that was frankly obscene. But also mission parameters, operational guidelines, everything designed to keep work legitimate and targeted at genuine threats. I'll think about it, John said finally. Theodore nodded and stood. That's all I ask. But John, whether you take the job or not, you're family now. Those boys worship you. Virginia and we owe you everything. So if you need anything, ever, you call. After Theodore left, John sat in the garden, thinking. Ron had sent him updates on the investigation. The network they dismantled was massive, hundreds of victims over a decade, billions in transactions. Gregory Webb was cooperating, giving up names and locations in exchange for a slightly less horrific prison sentence. But the shepherd remained elusive. No name, no face, just a ghost orchestrating horrors from the shadows. John's phone buzzed. Ron. Got something. Webb is singing, and he just gave us a location. The Shepherd's safe house, or one of them. Place in West Virginia, mountain property. Could be a trap, but send me the address. John, this is FBI business now. We've got a task force. How long before they're authorized to move? Silence. Days. Maybe a week. Bureaucracy. Send the address. John hung up and looked at the folder Theodore had given him. Then he looked at the estate, at the house where 2 boys were learning to feel safe again. Maybe Theodore was right. Maybe hiding wasn't the answer. Maybe the only way to have peace was to make sure monsters like the shepherd couldn't hurt anyone else. He pulled out his phone and texted Theodore. I'll take the job. But first, I have some unfinished business. The response came immediately. Whatever you need. John stood and walked to his truck. Time to introduce the shepherd to the wolf they'd accidentally awakened. The address Ron sent led to an old logging operation in the Appalachian Mountains. Abandoned decades ago, but recently renovated. John spent 2 days watching the property from the ridge, documenting patterns. 3 men on site, rotating shifts. 1 vehicle, armored SUV, high-end security system, but old hardware easier to hack. On the 3rd night, John made his move. He cut power to the property at 2 a.m., then breached through the same vulnerability as before, old infrastructure that wealthy criminals thought was secure but never properly updated. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The security team was scrambling, checking breakers, assuming it was a standard outage. John moved through the darkness like smoke, taking them down one by one. Choke holds, quick and silent. No killing that wasn't who he was anymore. The master bedroom was on the 2nd floor. John kicked in the door to find a man in his 60s, gray-haired and dignified, sitting calmly at a desk despite the chaos below. The famous John Mueller, the man said. I've heard so much about you. You the shepherd? That's one name. The man, no identification on him. Nothing personal in the room, studied John with cold intelligence. You've cost me a considerable amount of money. The Donnelly auction would have been spectacular. Instead, you've dismantled years of work. Good. Is it? The shepherd leaned back. Do you have any idea how many people depend on my network? How many politicians, businessmen, people of influence have invested in our operations? You didn't shut down a criminal enterprise, Mr. Mueller. You kicked a hornet's nest. Then I'll deal with the hornets. The shepherd smiled. I'm sure you will. Tell me, does it feel good? Playing hero? Saving children? Does it wash away what you did in Kabul? John's gun hand didn't waver. You don't know anything about Kabul. I know everything about you. CIA file, psychological evaluations, the whole tragic story. A good man broken by bad orders, trying to find redemption in mulch and roses. Touching, really. Get up. We're leaving. To what? Federal custody. Even if I'm arrested, I'll be out in 5 years. Men like me don't stay imprisoned. We have too many friends in high places. John stepped closer. Then I'll make sure you stay down permanently. You won't kill me. That's not who you are anymore, remember? You're the hero now. Heroes don't execute unarmed men. John studied him. This monster who'd orchestrated the torture and trafficking of children with the same calm he'd used discussing stock portfolios. The shepherd was right, John couldn't just shoot him. But there were other ways. You're right, John said. I won't kill you. But I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. He zip-tied the shepherd and pulled out his phone, starting a video. State your name. I'll do no such thing. John pulled up a file. Ron had sent documentation of the shepherd's network, photos of victims, transaction records. Then I'll tell it for you. You're Donnie Guzman, former State Department official, current CEO of Guzman International Holdings. And you've been running a global child trafficking network for 12 years. Guzman's calm cracked. You can't prove. Gregory Webb already gave you up. Agent Carson gave you up. Every server, every transaction, every communication, the FBI has it all. But here's the thing that takes time to prosecute. Months, years, and like you said, you have friends. John set the phone down. Camera is still recording. So instead, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you are. This video will be on every news site, every social media platform, every law enforcement database by dawn. Your face, your name, your crimes. The FBI can take their time building a case. You'll already be convicted in the court of public opinion. You're insane. My lawyers. Your lawyers can't help you. Neither can your friends. Because here's what happens to child traffickers in federal prison, especially rich ones who think they're untouchable. Other inmates don't like your kind. And guards? Guards look the other way. John leaned in close. You wanted to know if saving those boys made me feel better about Kabul? It didn't. Nothing will. But ensuring you spend the rest of your life in a hell of your own making, that'll help me sleep at night. He grabbed Guzman and dragged him downstairs, past his unconscious security team, and zip-tied him to the gate at the end of the driveway. Then he called 911, state police, the FBI, and finally, every major news outlet he could think of. There's a wanted fugitive tied to a gate on Route 41, mile marker 67, he told each one. Donnie Guzman, also known as the Shepherd. He's the leader of the trafficking ring you've been reading about. Might want to hurry before someone else finds him. By the time John drove away, the first news van was already approaching. Behind them, police lights lit up the mountain road. The shepherd was caught in his own spotlight, and there would be no escaping it. John returned to the Donnelly estate as the sun rose. He parked his truck, dirty and exhausted, and found Theodore waiting on the terrace with coffee. I saw the news, Theodore said, handing him a cup. Donnie Guzman. They're calling it the biggest trafficking bust in decades. It's done. Is it? John thought about the servers, the network, all those buyers and sellers scattered across the globe. The FBI has their work cut out for them. But the leadership is gone. The network's fractured. It'll take years to rebuild, and they'll be operating under constant surveillance. Thanks to you. Thanks to a lot of people doing their jobs. John sipped the coffee. It was perfect. Theodore remembered how he took it. Your offer still stand? Theodore smiled. Absolutely. When can you start? After I finish the fountain repairs, and after I teach Benjamin and Milton how to properly prune roses. Take your time. Theodore stood, then paused. John, I know what you did out there wasn't exactly by the book. But those boys, my boys, they're alive, because you were willing to do what others couldn't or wouldn't. That matters more than I can ever express. After Theodore left, John sat on the terrace, watching the sun climb over the estate. Somewhere, Benjamin and Milton were sleeping peacefully. Somewhere, federal agents were processing crime scenes and building cases. Somewhere, Donnie Guzman was beginning to understand that money and connections couldn't save him from what he'd become. And here, John Mueller was exactly where he needed to be. Not hiding, not running, just ready for whatever came next. His phone buzzed. "Ron, you're trending on Twitter," Ron said. Hashtag Gardner Hero. "Someone leaked your background, not everything, but enough. You're famous now." "Great. The CIA wants to talk to you, unofficially. There are operations they could use your expertise on." John watched a deer emerge from the tree line, grazing peacefully near the rose garden. "Tell them I'm busy," John said. "I have a new job, and this time I'm doing it my way." He hung up and finished his coffee as the estate came to life around him. Virginia appeared on the balcony, waving good morning. The boys would be up soon, asking him about the fish again, about bugs, about all the small wonders they'd learned to appreciate after facing darkness. John had spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to forget who he'd been and what he'd done. But maybe redemption wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about using what you'd learned, who you'd become, to make sure others didn't suffer. He stood and walked toward the garden. Work to be done, life to be lived, and if monsters came calling again, well, they'd learn the same lesson the shepherd had. Some gardens have thorns, and this gardener remembered how to draw blood.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you